Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping into architectural photography, specifically how the pros manage light.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area.
We've looked at insights from some really experienced photographers to see how they use light. It's not just about making things bright, is it?
Not at all. It's more like they sculpt with it. They interpret the architecture using light itself.
So our goal here is to unpack some of those key methods, the tools they use to get those really stunning building and interior shots.
Exactly. And the insights we're drawing on, they come from a photographer with something like 20 years in the business, mixing old school techniques and the latest stuff.
Right, so they really know their stuff. The point seems to be that controlling light isn't just technical, it's artistic interpretation too.
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
where the technical skill meets the creative eye.
Okay, let's dig in then. First up, something called flagging light. Now, for many of us, our photo skills might just be our phones. So what exactly is flagging? Why is it so important?
Okay, so flagging at its core, it's about using black stuff, could be actual flags on stands, sometimes called gobos, or even just, black cars.
Black materials.
Yeah, non-reflective black. And you use them to block or shape the light very precisely.
Ah, okay.
In architectural work, it's super useful for cutting out unwanted reflections. Think shiny surfaces, glass, polished stone, maybe metal, or those really intense highlights that just, well, distract.
So you're sort of taking away light in specific spots?
Pretty much. You're applying shadow, strategically, you could say, to clean things up.
Right.
Let the building's shape and texture come through without those distracting hotspots.
How do they actually do that on a shoot?
Well, often you'll see these flags positioned just outside the camera's view,
Mm-hmm.
maybe on what they call C stands, those heavy-duty stands or boom arms to reach out.
Right.
And they're carefully angled to block, say, direct sun hitting a window just wrong, or maybe some stray light bouncing around.
And indoors too.
Oh, yeah. Indoors, you might use smaller gobos to control the light spilling from your strobes, your flashes, making sure the light only goes where you want it. It's quite amazing how a small black card can change the whole look of a surface.
That makes sense. So the big wins for using flags are.
Number one is precise control. You dictate exactly where the light doesn't go,
Okay.
which is key for reducing glare, getting rid of those blown-out highlights that just kill detail. It helps balance the exposure across the shot, too.
Right.
And importantly, because you're often just tweaking existing light, it helps keep things looking natural, believable.
But it can't be all easy. There must be downsides.
Oh, for sure. You need extra gear, right? The flags, the stands, that takes
Yeah.
up space, which can be a real pain, especially in tight indoor spots.
Yeah, I can see that.
And setting it all up, it takes time. You have to be quite meticulous. Plus, there's always the risk that while you're blocking light here, you accidentally create a new weird shadow over there.
Ah, okay. A bit of a balancing act then.
Def.
So flagging takes light away, but sometimes the problem is that the light you have is just too harsh, isn't it? Which brings us to scrims. What are they about?
Yeah, scrims are kind of the opposite idea, in a way. Instead of blocking light, they diffuse it, soften it.
Right.
Think of a big sheet of translucent white fabric. That's basically a scrim.
Mm-hmm.
Its job is to take harsh, direct light, like midday sun, and just spread it out, make it soft and even.
So like putting a giant softbox over the sun?
Ah, yeah, that's a good way to think about it. Or like thin cloud passing over, just takes the edge off that harshness.
How are they used in practice?
Well, outdoors, you might see huge scrims rigged up overhead on frames, especially if you're shooting a building facade in bright sunlight.
Right.
Indoors, you could place one near a window to soften the natural light coming in, making it wrap around objects more gently.
And why is that soft, diffused light so desirable? What's the benefit?
It gives you this beautiful, almost commercial-looking quality of light. It's fantastic for showing texture like on stone or wood without burning out the highlights. All that detail just disappears otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
It's perfect for taming bright, sunny days, avoiding those really stark black shadows. It can even make it look more like a softly overcast day, which often gives a really nice, even exposure.
Sounds ideal for tricky sun, but dealing with big sheets of fabric.
Yeah.
Any challenges there?
Yeah, definitely. Big scrims, especially outside, can act like sails in the wind. So you often need assistance or really sturdy stands to hold them securely.
Right, safety first.
And they can be bulky to carry around and set up. If you're in a really small room or somewhere with low ceilings, using a big scrim just might not be practical.
Okay, so we've got taking light away with flags, softening it with scrims. But what if there just isn't enough light or it's not in the right place, which leads to adding light strobes, flash? Why bring artificial light into what might be a naturally lit scene?
Good question. There are a few key reasons. Mostly it's about balance. Balancing the artificial light with the ambient, the existing light,
Okay.
or filling in shadows that are just too deep, where you're losing important detail.
That's right.
Or sometimes you want to specifically highlight a feature, maybe an interesting architectural detail, make it pop a bit.
I see.
You see this a lot in high-end interior shots, like for hotels or magazines, where they want a really polished, controlled look. The aim isn't usually to make it look obviously flashed, but to enhance what's there.
So how do they use them? Just point a flash at the ceiling.
Sometimes, bouncing light off ceilings or walls with off-camera strobes is really common. It creates a softer, more spread-out fill light.
Right. Less harsh.
Exactly. Another big technique is shooting multiple exposures, maybe one lit mainly by flash for the room, another capturing the ambient light, and then blending them later in software.
Ah, compositing.
Yep. And you can also get really strategic, placing lights carefully to emphasize depth or
Yeah.
guide the viewer's eye through the space.
And the payoff for all that extra gear and setup.
Well, you get immense control, especially in dim spaces or places with mixed lighting like daylight from windows and warm indoor lamps. That can be tricky.
Mm-hmm.
Strobes let you balance everything out, get clean highlights, define shadows. It's really key for that professional, polished look.
But isn't there a danger it just looks fake? Lit.
Absolutely, that's the big risk.
Mm-hmm.
If it's overdone or not blended carefully, it can look very artificial, very flashy.
Yeah.
And of course, it means more kit to carry and manage: lights, batteries or power packs, stands, maybe softboxes or umbrellas to shape the light, triggers to fire them all.
Sounds complicated.
It can be. And it definitely adds time in post-processing too, dealing with those multiple layers and making the blend seamless.
Right. Now, speaking of blending and tricky lighting, there's this technique called the window pull. Sounds intriguing. What's the idea there?
The window pull is a clever fix, mostly using flash, for a classic problem:
Hmm.
shooting interiors where the windows are way brighter than the room itself.
Oh, yeah, I know that one. Exposed for the room, the window blows out white. Exposed for the window, the room's pitch black.
Exactly. So the window pull is designed to get you detail in both.
How does that work then?
Typically, you take at least 2 shots. One where you expose for the view outside the window, keeping those highlights under control.
Okay.
And another shot where you light the interior using flash, bringing its exposure up to balance better with the outside. You're essentially pulling the detail back into the window view while lighting the room.
And then you combine them.
Precisely. In post-production, using software like Photoshop, you blend these exposures together, often using things called luminosity masks, which are ways to select areas based on brightness, or just carefully painting bits of each image in.
Wow, so it's partly shooting technique, partly digital skill.
Very much so.
What's the main advantage of doing all that?
The big win is you get detail everywhere inside the room and the view outside. It makes the image feel much more real, more immersive. You see the context.
Yeah, crucial for real estate or showing off a location.
Absolutely. It adds depth and stops the windows just being these blank white rectangles.
And I guess the blending part needs a careful hand.
Definitely. It takes skill to make it look natural, not like a cut-and-paste job. And setting up the flash just right on location takes testing. Plus, sometimes the reflections on the glass itself can complicate things when you try to blend.
Okay, so we've talked about controlling light, adding light. What about when the light range in the scene is just huge? Too much difference between brights and darks. That sounds like where bracketing comes in.
Exactly right. Bracketing and blending is the go-to for scenes with really high dynamic range. That just means a massive difference between the brightest highlights and the darkest shadows.
Like a room with bright sun streaming in one part and deep shadows in another.
Perfect example.
Ah.
A single photo just can't capture detail in both those extremes simultaneously. Your camera sensor has limits.
So how does taking multiple pictures help?
You take a series of shots of the exact same scene, usually on a tripod so nothing moves, typically 3 or 5 photos. One will be normally exposed. Then you'll take 1 or 2 deliberately brighter, overexposed to get detail in the shadows, and 1 or 2 darker underexposed to make sure the brightest highlights aren't blown out.
And then you merge them all together somehow.
Yep, you use software to combine the best exposed parts of each image into one final picture.
Is this basically HDR, high dynamic range? I've heard that term.
It is related, yeah. HDR software is often used for this. But an important point from the pros is often to lean towards manual blending, rather than just hitting the auto HDR button.
Why is that?
It gives you more control, helps you avoid that kind of hyper-real, sometimes grungy or overly processed HDR look that can happen if the software goes too far. You aim for naturalism.
Gotcha. More control, more natural results. So the main benefit of all this bracketing and blending effort.
It lets you capture the full range of light in a really challenging scene. You don't lose the shadows, you don't lose the highlights.
Right.
It's great for keeping the natural feel of the light, especially indoors, where you might have really bright windows and darker corners. You get detail everywhere.
Any potential pitfalls with this one?
Well, if anything moves between the shots, like leaves on a tree outside the window or a person walking through you, you can get ghosting when you blend.
Ah, because they're in different places in each frame.
Exactly. That's why a tripod is absolutely essential. And, like we said with HDR, if you push the processing too hard, it can just look unnatural. Subtlety is key.
This has been really illuminating, no pun intended. It's clear there's a lot of craft here. I think one of the sources really summed it up well at the end.
Yeah, the photographer we focused on made a really great point. For pros doing this work, controlling light is really where their creative ideas meet their technical skills.
Mm-hmm.
All these things we've talked about, the flags, scrims, strobes, the blending, they aren't just about fixing problems. They're the tools they use to actually shape how we see the building, to interpret it with light.
So they're actively sculpting the final image with light, not just recording what's there.
Exactly. They're translating the three-dimensional space and the architect's intent into their photographic vision. It's about using light to tell the story.
That's a powerful way to put it. And I think there was a mention of some extra resources.
Yes. The photographer mentioned potentially having things like a detailed gear checklist for lighting and maybe a step-by-step guide on how to do that exposure blending in post-production. Could be really useful for people wanting to try this.
Definitely. And just to remind everyone, this is all based on insights from a pro with what, 2 decades of doing this?
Yeah, 20 years, using both traditional and modern techniques.
Okay, so just to quickly recap the main techniques we covered.
Sure. We talked about flagging, blocking light precisely, using scrims for soft diffusion, adding light with strobes or flash for balance and effect,
Right.
the window pull technique for balancing bright windows and interiors,
Mhm.
and finally bracketing and blending exposures to handle high dynamic range scenes.
It really highlights how much skill goes into professional architectural photography.
Mm.
It's way more than just pointing and shooting. It's this really deliberate art of manipulating light.
Totally. Understanding how light behaves and then using these tools to make compelling images.
So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. Next time you're out and about, maybe just take a second to really look at how light is hitting buildings, how shadows define shape, how sunlight changes the feel of a space.
Yeah, how does the light shape your perception of it?
Exactly. Hopefully this chat gives you a bit of a new lens, again, no pun intended, for appreciating both architecture and the photos we see of it.